Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're just waiting for everyone to get in and then we'll get started. All right, just one more minute and then we'll get going. Okay, thank you so much to everyone for joining us today for the first GoAERO Technical Rules webinar. We're so excited to have you here and get the competition moving and going and moving forward. We will start with our video in case folks haven't had an opportunity to see it, and then we'll jump into a quick overview of the competition with our CEO, Gwen Leiter, and then Sky Sartorius will lead our technical rules and offer you insight and details on all of the rules, guidelines, and timeline. And then we'll be sure to leave plenty of time for questions. In terms of logistics, we would ask that you use the Q&A function in the Zoom webinar that you'll see in your top panel to pose your questions. Unfortunately, you won't be able to speak because of the number of attendees we have with the webinar. So please use the Q&A function and we will read your questions out loud so that everyone can hear them. And then we'll take an opportunity to answer as many as we can.
See heroes every day. Heroes who look past danger to help people in need. Heroes who step in to be the difference between triumph and tragedy. And heroes who use their minds to create technology that saves lives. We need those heroes. We're launching a new prize competition for a singular mission, saving lives. More than $2 million in total prizes is on the line for the best thinkers, creators, and inventors to stretch and challenge their minds, to change the way we reach people in the face of disaster, unlocking a new era of rescue response, an era that unleashes the power of autonomy, speed, and precision. Alongside NASA and Pratt & Whitney, GoAERO is looking for the brightest, boldest, and bravest innovators to change the way we rescue and respond to disaster. This is your chance to make history and save lives. Join us. Ready, set, GoAERO.
And now I'm happy to introduce GoAERO CEO Gwen Leiter.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us from all around the world. We are truly excited to be launching this competition with you. As you know, by this point, GoAERO is a 3-year competition with over $2 million in prizes to build emergency response flyers that rescue people in danger and respond to disaster wherever it is found. These flyers will perform critical missions. They will bring a first responder to someone. They will rescue a person in need, and they will perform critical response missions that bring in needed supplies and services to a variety of different medical situations, climate change situations, disaster situations. What we're trying to do is aviation for public good. We are on a mission actually to save lives. And to that end, we really need this. We need these flyers now. Around the globe in 2022, there were over 380 natural disasters. If you can switch the slide, Nidhi, please. There were over 380 natural disasters affecting 185 million people, with a loss of lives of over 30,000. Even on a good day, in the US alone, and this is a global phenomenon, but in the US alone, there are 4.5 million people who live in ambulance deserts, which means that even on that good day when the sun is shining and everything is perfect and there's no traffic, it still takes over 25 minutes for people who need help to receive the medical attention that they need. We are in a time and a place where we have the ability to harness technology, to create some transformative technology, and to actually save lives. And that is what GoAERO is all about. So to that end, we invite you to join us. The competition is divided into 3 different stages. There is the paper stage, and we'll go into this more. There's the paper stage, the prototype stage, which can be full-scale or subscale devices. And then, of course, we have the final fly-off, where we have multiple prizes in each of the 5 missions. And as well, we have an autonomy prize, as well as the disruptor prize. The team that does the best in the 5 missions will win the top prize. An important thing to note is that teams do not need to win a previous prize in order to continue on to the next stage. And so that way, GoAERO's fundamental belief that innovation can come from anyone, anywhere, and that perseverance is very often the key. Those fundamental beliefs are part and parcel of what we are doing with this competition. We are very fortunate to be partnering with a number of different entities and organizations, including Boeing and NASA and RTX, Pratt & Whitney, and Iridium and X-Wing and Global Aerospace. So too, this competition is truly a global competition. Our technical rules were informed by hundreds of interviews with aviation experts, first responders as well, and of course our organizational partners, which include both aviation organizations and first responder organizations. We would like these flyers to have real world applicability. Once again, I cannot stress enough, we are on a mission to save lives, and these flyers are all about doing good. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Sky Sartorius, to dive into the technical rules with you all.
Morning. Yeah, so the goal of this webinar is really to help participants understand the rules and answer the questions. I'm glad that we're going to be doing 2 of these because we don't yet know where the Q&A is going to go. So at the next one, if there's, this is going to inform where we might focus the next one, but these will both be recorded. We're not going to talk about why the rules are the way they are or anything like this. It's really just to go through the details, give as much time as possible for you guys to ask questions and get into those nitty-gritty details that you need, the information that you need in order to start designing and developing things to compete in this competition. So let's click. So I'm just going to go through like brief overview of the missions, what you're going to be asked to do at the fly-off. And I think, there's a bit of an assumption that most of the audience today has read through the rule book. So we will be dedicating most of this Q&A, but I will go through a big overview of the missions first. So 5 missions are productivity, adversity, maneuvering, precision, and adaptation. Kind of like a pentathlon, there's a way to gather points in each of these, but you can also just win each of these missions outright. And kind of the event looks like everybody gathering together over the course of a long weekend and getting those missions flown. Everybody, all the participants flying off, attempting and flying all 5 of those missions over the course of a long weekend. Next slide. So what you have to build for this competition is a single occupant aircraft, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. The payload that you need to be able to carry is an anthropomorphic mannequin named Alex, 125 pounds, 5'5" tall. There is a link in the rule book to this specific make and model that GoAERO is going to be supplying at the competition. And then we'll go to talk about the missions in order. So the next chart. So the productivity mission is kind of a 2-parter. First off is when you need to get to the mission area and deploy the system. So your whole system, aircraft and ground station included, need to be able to fit on a kind of a highway legal device, like highway legal vehicle, so height and width limits. For this mission, you're going to be asked to drive to this mission area, park near this operation zone, which is denoted by cyan here, somewhere within that extra lane that's also drawn, and get the system ready to fly. So that's once you arrive there, that's when the timer starts. You have a certain amount of time to get it done. Otherwise, your mission timer starts after that. And there are some bonus points to be awarded if you're able to do this really quickly. You can take off, you can take off directly from your vehicle, or you can take the time to unload. In order so that like pre-flight checks are unhurried, there is one single pause of the timer that you are expected to take in order to, without touching your system, inspect it to make sure you set it up correctly and things are airworthy and ready to go. So that's kind of the first part, is once you have the system ready to fly. And then once you start flying, you take off, fly a circuit. You have the baseline and end line set up so that you just fly laps between them. The distance between the baseline and end line is TBD because we don't have a venue yet. The goal is to have it be as long as possible and still be within line of sight limitations. And in that case, we'd be able to get rid of kind of return laps, and it would just be a single out and back. But for now, as it's drawn here, it kind of accounts for the possibility that we might have to fit into a smaller footprint. Anyway, so you fly a segment, come back, land. Once you touch down, then your payload handlers can go in, load some payload, and then they need to leave, right? Payload handlers have maintained some off-stand distance when they're from the aircraft whenever it's airborne. Then you fly another segment with payload, land, repeat and reverse. Payload handlers come in, unload the payload, fly empty, come back, load again, and you repeat this and do this for 90 minutes, so an hour and a half. And the goal is just to move as much payload as possible. In this case, in addition to the nominal ALEX payload, you can take up to 3 40-pound sandbags, or in lieu of the ALEX payload also, or a dozen lengths, 6-foot lengths of the number 5 rebars. So those are like 6 pounds-ish each. And so that's the idea, is that you can choose to get points by carrying a lot of weight. You could choose to carry more loads of less weight, or fewer loads of more weight. And the score is normalized in this case by the total system weight, excluding ground station. So the weight of the aircraft, but also any if you need to do a battery change or refuel the aircraft during the course of this mission, then that would also be counted against the system weight. Next chart. The adversity mission is where it's really testing like being able to operate in difficult conditions, and this is one of the most important and also one of the most unique things about the GoAERO competition. So it's just about taking on the land in difficult conditions. There are 5 operation zones, or OZs, listed here. You start and end at the base, which is just like normal flat piece of ground, like hard surface. But from there, you need to go to one of the other 4 listed here, and you take off. You have to overfly a certain central marker. The marker's there just so you get a sense to give us flexibility in laying out the course, because again, we don't know the venue yet. But the There's the pit, which is basically loose, dry sand, where it's kind of a 12-foot by 12-foot zone where you have to touch down. Right? These are all the boundaries that are just kind of ground contact points. So it's dry sand, and then it's a larger patch of sand than just 12 foot by 12 feet. And then like beyond that, you know, could be 20 or 30 feet away. It's kind of little walls to contain the sand, but those little walls are designed to not interfere with the aircraft, just to try to contain the sand. There's a hill that's a high tracking surface at a 12-degree incline, and again, the hill itself is going to be a lot bigger than 11 by 11 feet, so that you know when you're on it, you still have to account for the kind of the extension of the plane that hill is on. In both directions, uphill and downhill. The flood is knee-deep water with moderate simulated rainfall. And then the tornado is like just a hard surface, a normal hard surface, but with wind machines trying to make swirly, difficult wind conditions. And so you have to go and land in each of those. Landing here just means touching it. So it could mean like, still hovering, but touching it. And you have to stay there for 2 minutes and then take off again and go onto a different one. You can do this in any order you want. And then you just return to the base. And this is timed, fastest winds. Next one, please. Okay, so the maneuvering mission, the slalom course is an obstacle course. You start at the base and you start with the Alex payload on board. You go around this course, around the pylon, so these obstacles, it's TBD how they're going to be built, but you need to avoid them. It is not illegal to contact the obstacles per se, but if you damage them such to the point that they're not usable again as obstacles, then that's disqualifying. So rounding obstacle 1, you have to cross a beam at least 50 feet, and then round that pylon, then go around 2 and 4. You need to go around those at less than 35 feet at the highest point of the vehicle. And obstacle 3 is a wall that you can either go over or around. And then the landing is at the spot, which is only 8 feet by 8 feet. Again, this is just where the ground contact is made, and you have to get to the spot through a 28-foot wide gate. So you land at the spot. In this case, the timer pauses during the payload changes. So once you land at the spot, the timer pauses for up to a few minutes, and then you can so you land there. The timer pauses. You can unload the payload, and then like the payload handlers leave, and then you can take off again. The timer restarts. You go run this backwards, empty a payload, touch down at the base, and run it forwards again empty. Then your last landing at the spot, you go in again with your payload handlers, reload that payload, again, timer pause, and run it in reverse. And that final touchdown at the base, that's when your timer stops. And again, this is a race against the clock. Next one, please. The precision mission, so this is kind of testing your fine motor skills. So there's, you start at, so that like OZ on the right is kind of like the base OZ is a hard surface. But in addition to that, there are kind of 4 spots that you just have to touch somewhere in there sometime during the mission. But you start and land at that area. You can choose at the beginning, in the middle, or the end to do those touches. But then sometime during the course of your mission, you need to do the other tests in order. And then, so the toss is like a 6-foot diameter aperture in a wall. And in this case, the wall is, we'll do our best to make it physical, where touching it is allowed. But again, like the robustness and structural integrity of that wall is not guaranteed. So you have to toss a soft kind of 10-pound beanbag through there. And then it has to like gently be lobbed enough so that it falls then through a 6-foot diameter hoop on the other side. The push is like a plunger. So it's a 5-inch diameter plunger that you have to depress somewhere between 1 and 6 inches. And you have to hold it there for a total of 20 seconds. Those 20 seconds don't have to be continuous, by the way. One thing I should have mentioned on the adversity mission is that when you're touched down for 2 minutes in those OZs, those do have to be contiguous minutes. The balloon pop is just a couple of balloons in a pool. They're tethered to the middle. One's below the surface. One is kind of loosely tethered, contained within a certain radius, and you have to pop both of those. And then I mentioned the touch before. So you do all 4 of those tasks, and once all 4 tasks are done and you've landed back at the starting point, then that's when you're done and the timer stops. All right, let's go to the last one. Great. The adaptation mission. So this one, yeah, it visually looks complicated, but basically you see there's just an array of up to 20 ground markers that are roughly in a grid. And you start again at the base, which is a hard flat surface. And right at the starting point, that's when these markers are set to a certain state. And the state can be green, red, or amber. And what that state is determines what you have to do. So red, simplest, don't overfly it with any part of the vehicle at all. Otherwise, that marker is violated. And then green, you need to overfly it, and you need usually one designated point on your vehicle needs to overfly within a 10-foot diameter cylinder above that, but below 35 feet. And then similarly for amber, same thing, but above 50 feet. And so your task is to say, okay, what is the state of this array? What's the best way to fly through it? Like what's the optimal flight path? And then actually executing that flight path. And at the end, you have to cross the finish line. The finish line is just a plane. You have to fully go across that plane and then back across it again. So it's not just speed across it like flying through. You need to go through, stop quickly, then reverse through it before your timer stops. And then that's when the timer stops, but then you still have to go back and land back where you started. Right, that's all for the mission explanation. So go to the next chart. Next chart. Yeah, so this is kind of a summary that's nice to have up there. I'll let you read that for a moment, but I'm going to switch to screen sharing in just a moment to kind of guide you to the best place to follow along for the rest of this. So, cool. Where's my share button? Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. Oh no. Are you able to
Yes,
fix
it'll be
that?
just. There you go. Try again.
That should do it. All right, so if you want to follow along today, so this is the GoAERO website, herox.com/GoAERO. And when it comes to when we're talking about the rules, what I do is I just go here, I do a quick find for a rule book. And the second hit down here, that's when you can get to a link to get to the rule book. So this is kind of the document that, you know, if I were building a team to do the GoAERO competition and I had a bunch of talented engineers and they said, hey, what are we going to build? This is the document that I would hand them in a kind of a succinct way to say, okay, these are the requirements that we need to build to for the thing that needs to show up at the fly off and perform. So there's some stuff up here about the points and everything. So I think I'll talk about that first. So I talked about each mission and how you can just show up and win that mission outright, and there's a prize for that. In addition, you can, like, your performance throughout the competition lets you gather these points in a certain way. It's just like a pentathlon in track and field or a decathlon or whatever it may be, where each event is worth some points and the most points wins this top prize. So you can see that the majority of points available are for the completion points. So 15 points for each mission fully completed. And then each mission also has a definition of partial completion criteria. And so that's worth 5 points. And then if you are able to fully complete the mission and you be the best at it, then you get 5 more points. Or if you're the second best at it, you get 2 more points. And then if you're able to do all 5 missions, you get a small bonus. And so that almost fully compensates for the cap of 70 points on completion points. And then the operating crew bonus and the workload bonus, those get you some extra points if you're able to operate the vehicle with only one person, or operate it when the vehicle is airborne, not touch any of the controls, right? So that's rewarding autonomy in that case. And then there's this deployment bonus talked about in that first mission, the productivity mission. When you deploy the vehicle, if you're able to do it really quickly, that's worth some bonus points as well. And yeah, if you want that top prize, you need to fully complete at least one mission, and then at least partially complete 2 other missions with payload in order to be eligible for that top prize. And yeah, then there's other things about ties and stuff. The rest of the document just kind of goes into the very detailed stuff about the missions. So it's kind of laid out kind of a summary of the definition of the operation zones where you have to take off and land at the top. And then there's a mission profile that says, hey, in order, this is what you have to do. And then in this case, for the part 2 mission is split into 2. And then below that, there's kind of a lot of extra information in a bulleted list that talks about, all the little nuances, edge cases, things like that, additional information you need. And then at the bottom of each mission, there's kind of images if it's needed, and then talk about the scoring. So this is where you'll go in to find your partial completion criteria. So in this case, partial completion is just not moving as much weight. And then it talks about, hey, what determines the winner. So that's how each of the missions are laid out. So I talked through all of these. One of the things to point out is in this, because not every configuration of this randomized array is going to be the same for everybody. This may end up being a tournament format where the final winners are determined by going head to head on identical arrays side by side at the same time. And then there's like a whole bunch of additional rules and information about the spirit of the competition, some more information on the Alex mannequin. Yeah, so this term, if you want, this is highly Googleable. That's where you can find the specific model of the mannequin that we'll be using. But for your own development and testing, that you don't need to purchase the full thing. You can just get a department store mannequin and ballast it if you like. And there will be a webinar with that mannequin vendor, so you can get a good idea of like how much mobility the joints have and things like that, so you know how to design your vehicle around it. More information about transport and staging. So in addition to that, like highway vehicle, you need to be able to, like when you're on site at the competition, you need to be able to get around, right? You need to be able to taxi the vehicle or be able to put it on dolly and get it around, because you need to be able to do that in order to facilitate the logistics running competition. And there are penalties for not being able to do that. Penalties are basically in the form of points lost. So the penalties, so any penalty means that you can't, you don't get full credit for the mission. So if you have any penalties whatsoever for a mission, then you can't win that mission. So single penalties are going out of bounds of an OZ. So like if one wheel touches inside and one wheel touches outside. And then double penalties are like, other illegal contact of anything outside of the OZ. So other than the explicitly allowed mission elements that we talked about. And then, like I said, not being able to meet those staging and unstaging requirements, like being able to taxi around efficiently. And then if you damage things, the payloads. And then there's also just like total disqualification if you do really, gross violations, rules, unsportsmanlike conduct, or anything unsafe, or a range excursion or something like that. I think other important thing is these are, in case that wasn't clear, these are all uncrewed vehicles. The only human-like thing on board will be that mannequin. And the total operating crew is limited to 2 people. So that includes 2 people for getting the system ready, like from that highway legal vehicle, and then also operating the aircraft. So uncrewed vehicles, and so that operating crew, to be clear, doesn't include the payload handlers you need to use in the productivity and maneuvering missions to get the payloads on and off. And also like payload handlers to help get that payload on before like other missions, if need be. So take on landing definition. So they're just like, hey, what does like actually landing mean? So that means kind of touching down with a load bearing part of the aircraft. And then some more thing on mission order and attempts. So it's safest to assume that you will get at most 1 attempt at each mission. And that's it for rules. If you want to take back the screen share and go back to that summary chart, I think that would be a good artifact to have up for Q&A.
Sure.
So actually, I think I have it here. Yeah, okay, we can have that there.
Great. Thanks so much, Sky. It looks like we've got several questions in queue. So we'll just start at the top. Are there any vehicle size limits?
No, so there are no vehicle size limits explicitly. The closest thing that's like a really explicit limit is being able to fit it in a disassembled or folded up state on that highway legal vehicle. And then also on that maneuvering mission, you have that gate that you have to fit through that's 28 feet wide in order to access that spot OD. So vehicles that are bigger than that or about that size and can't maneuver really precisely and are at risk of hitting that gate, those won't be able to attempt that mission. And then in addition to that, there are other missions like the adaptation mission, where the spacing of that grid means that there are definite advantages to having a smaller aircraft, but it's not kind of an explicit must be small.
35% subscale, meaning 35% of weight of Alex. So 43.75 pounds or something else.
No, that's a size scale. So, 1 meter becomes 35 centimeters. So that scale is chosen such that most of these aircraft at that minimum scale can still be prototyped at less than 25 kilos of gross weight. So they fall under things like Part 107 regulations, just to make the regulatory environment easier for the stage 2.
So just as a follow-on, Skyler, so there's an assumption that Part 107 pilots are a requirement. Someone just wants to clarify that.
So Part 107 is for commercial operations, and whether or not your team is a commercial operation will depend on your team structure. And then for the fly-off, Part 107 is not applicable because all the aircraft will be much too heavy to be qualified for Part 107.
Are we suggesting that the vehicles must be a compact flyer?
I don't really understand the question. So if the question has to do with suggesting what the vehicles have to be, there's no requirement for the configurations of the aircraft. That's intentional. The intent of this rule set is to make it possible to participate with lots of different configurations or ideas.
Is there a maximum aircraft weight, or it just needs to be able to carry at least 125 pounds?
It just needs to be able to carry at least 125 pounds. There's no maximum aircraft weight.
Should the vehicles operate autonomously, or can they be remotely piloted?
Yes, they can be remotely piloted or autonomously. That's up to teams how they think it will be best, in terms of balancing the performance of the vehicle, the cost and weight of systems on board, the complexity, and it's a trade-off like anything in engineering and design is what's the right balance of level of autonomy for the mission and the task at hand.
Will there be any missions added to demonstrate the ability to ferry a patient to urgent care? This particular innovator is suggesting that our current missions favor only hovering vehicles.
So it is true that one of the only mission that is a good surrogate for that is the productivity mission, because that is the only mission that requires any flight over any reasonable distance. A lot of that just has to do with the practicalities of putting on a competition on a finite footprint and keeping things within line of sight. So no, we're not simulating, and none of these missions are intended to directly simulate any specific scenario. So to make that clear, all of them are abstractions that do their best to capture the skills and capabilities and attributes that are relevant for those scenarios, but none of them is intended to be a specific simulation of any one scenario. For the scenario described, that productivity mission is the closest thing because it requires moving a human stand-in payload over some distance. In that case, it's doing it over and over again. But that's the closest. All the other things are taking place over pretty compact space, and it's also important to note that not like we're not testing for range and endurance because we want because those are one of the things that make new configurations of these vehicles extremely difficult or almost impossible, and we want lots of participation and lots of new ideas, and so we don't want to preclude those new ideas by saying that these things have to, you know, fly really long distance or fly really fast or fly for a really long time. However, those attributes are just rewarded with better points, mostly in the productivity mission.
So along those same lines, why do we not consider fire as an adversary mission? Flying over flames is an incredible turbulent ordeal. If performing an extraction, you surely would not want to have loss of control in that event.
So fire, in the case of creating turbulence, that is being tested in the adversity mission in the really windy, swirly, turbulent conditions. So the vehicle's robustness to be able to handle that is being tested. Being able to handle high temperatures is not something that is realistic to test. So asking, you know, it would be just, you know, we could say, yes, it needs to be fireproof. And to test that, we're going to douse it in jet fuel and light it on fire. But that's not, for one, it's, you know, makes things extremely difficult, but it's also not really a very important attribute of a practical system either. Similarly, we're not going to ask the things to be submerged in salt water 10 meters underwater for 10 minutes, right? So there's just certain things that we're not testing either for practical reasons or for reasons of like just not as important attributes for the like kind of for these public good scenarios that we're trying to target.
Can you address any maximum decibel restrictions?
There are none. So there are no noise requirements, no noise limits for the competition. The only thing I will say is that at the fly off, keep in mind the health of your hearing and the hearing of other humans who are at the fly off. So if you're dealing with your vehicle, your aircraft, and it's really, really loud, wear hearing protection when you're doing your testing. So from a health and safety standpoint, it matters, but it's not measured or it's not relevant to winning the competition.
Why can't the ground crew enter the depot while the aircraft is en route to drop cargo so that cargo can be pre-positioned for automated loading?
So the pre-positioning of cargo for automated loading. So first of all, the way that productivity mission is laid out, where you're going out and back and flying alternating empty and with payload segments, is designed to simulate ferrying lots of payload from A to B. In this case, just A and B happen to be co-located so that those payloads can be recycled. But part of simulating ferrying from A to B is not assuming that at A, you have all these payloads in a nice little bundle ready to go. And so that's part of that. And then the other thing is payload handlers just aren't allowed in the zone when the aircraft is airborne, and that's simply for a safety separation in time of a live vehicle and humans being close to it. I think, so that was a multi-part question. I think I answered all the parts.
Yes, thank you. How small of a scaled model is allowable?
35% scale. So that, and that's a linear scale. So if your design for your full scale has, a 5 meter total width, then going down to 35% of 5 meters, which 17 and a half, let's see, 1.75 meters like total width, that would be the total scale. And then you can scale the weight of your payload. So how that's going to be measured is you're going to have to prove that you flew that vehicle with that scale payload on board. So if you say like, oh yeah, we flew it and it only had 3 pounds of payload on board, then we're going to say like, well, that wasn't 35% scale because you didn't have enough payload. And there's an FAQ about that that goes into more detail about doing the math. on determining what your payload should be for a certain linear scale vehicle.
Can we change aircraft geometry for different missions?
So that's addressed in the rules directly, but I can't change tabs because, so it's in here at the very bottom. This is how it's defined. It's not the super hard criterion. So if you're keeping the core elements of propulsion, lift, control, and lifting services, but somehow the vehicle's changing size, then that could be acceptable.
There are a couple of questions that we can address directly here about the specific rules and scoring for the first stage. The submission form is now available in full on the herox.com/GoAERO platform. It includes all of the technical reporting requirements and all of the submission requirements for the competition. So you will be able to see all of the pieces of the technical design report and all of the components of the submission that you were required to submit. We will also be posting all of this information on herox.com/GoAERO. So you'll be able to clearly see everything that you need to prepare for this particular stage. Criteria as well will be added so that you will understand how the judges will be reviewing your submissions as well. If there are any further questions regarding the rules and scoring of the first stage, we would encourage you to use the forum and to post any questions there so that we can address them.
So Nidhi, where can they find that stuff on the website?
The submission form is, once you're registered for the competition, you'll see a button that says begin entry, and that will take you directly to the submission form.
That's right, my login isn't registered for this one.
Correct.
So that'll be here, right?
Correct, yes. The blue button will change to join a team and begin entry. And as I said, we will also make the submission form available just on its own so that you can print it out and you can have it available for you to review and to share with your other teammates as well. And again, if you have other questions about the submission, what's required, the limits, the questions that are being asked, please use the forum so that we can address everything there. Can the mannequin be carried prone like a stretcher, like in a stretcher, excuse me?
Yes, so that's, why is this not changing tabs for me? There we go. So if we look at the talk about the payload, it says any plausible, reasonable position with probable strength for, and the key here is an active or passive human occupant. So it's up to you to decide like what you are imagining that occupant is or is doing. If that is just a person who's unconscious and lying down on a stretcher, that's fine. If it's an active pilot, you know, sitting or prone, that's also fine.
How strong are the tornado winds expected to be?
Okay, so that's not written in here. Maybe I had an FAQ about it, but it was written one time. They're going to be as strong as we can make them with off-the-shelf wind machines. So we don't know what that is yet. But if we can get up to like 15, 20 knots, that would be great. That's what we're aiming for.
Correct. That is what the FAQ says. This will depend on specific wind machines procured, but the objective is to achieve winds up to 20 knots.
And then like back to like the FAQ. So that's over here. So there's a lot of these things. So in addition to like reading the rule book, definitely peruse the FAQ because there are a lot of things for clarification. And a lot of the things are like have to do with where we weren't able to know for sure how it's going to be yet and write that into the rule book. We're able to put something in FAQ that give you an idea of like what we're thinking and what we're going to be trying to do. And so the wind machines are a good example of that, of saying like, hey, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, but this is what we're going to try for.
Is the 35% scaled model a max or minimum requirement?
Minimum. That's, I mean, that should be, yeah, at least. So, at least means that or more.
Are payload handlers part of our team, or will they be provided by GoAERO?
GoAERO will not provide payload handlers. So so that means that kind of sets a minimum number of personnel you will need to be able to bring to the fly off.
Are battery swaps?
And
Sorry about that. Go ahead.
I was just going to say there are creative things one can do, right? So if you have like really high travel expenses, you could recruit locally to wherever it's going to be happening, but the payload handlers will be part of your team.
Are battery swaps refueling allowed during missions?
Only during the productivity mission. So it's explicitly allowed during that mission, and it's even expected. So that 90 minutes was set intentionally to make it such that a vehicle that can do that whole productivity mission without refueling or swapping batteries is going to be way oversized for doing all the other ones. So it's expected that you have provisions for refueling or battery swaps. And the payload handlers are kind of also your pit crew. So those are the same people who are kind of allowed into that operation zone to do those things during that mission.
Are there any restrictions on battery versus gas-powered aircraft?
No, there is an FAQ on that. So that basically says there are no restrictions on energy sources that you want to use. However, it's strongly suggested not to use really exotic or really hazardous energy sources, like no hydrazine, please. It's somewhere on here. They're not. Let's see, they're not. Either. I'm trying to. I don't know where it is. Somewhere in there. They're not numbered. So.
Are there any restrictions or propulsion types or energy sources? While there are no explicit restrictions, exotic hazardous fuels and materials will not be allowed at the competition.
So, and it's, there are definitely some missions where electric is really advantageous, and there are other missions where it's disadvantageous, and that balance and that tension is one of the things that makes GoAERO interesting. It's that and many, many other areas where engineering trade-offs are required.
What is the size of the push button that needs to be depressed 2 to 6 inches?
That's called out specifically. 5-inch diameter, and depress it between 1 and 6 inches.
Can cargo be carried by a sling load?
So yes, but you need to still keep in mind the definitions of takeoff and landing that are in the rules, and that requires the aircraft actually touching down itself. So just hovering and releasing payloads as the rules are currently written isn't allowed. And so that's down here. So maybe that's where a little bit more discussion. So lifting off, no part of the aircraft remains in contact with the OZ. In this case, that would mean like also pieces of payload touching the ground if that's attached to the aircraft. And then a load-bearing part of the aircraft that bears a student part of the aircraft and the payload weight is in contact with the OZ. So while it is possible to say have a sling load and have that sling load touch down, you're still not landed until the part that the aircraft, the majority of the aircraft weight, a part of the structure that supports that weight is touching the ground.
Is it permissible to use multiple small drones simultaneously for the missions?
Yes. So that scenario was explicitly considered, and for example, for the precision mission, the difficulty there is that you're not done until the whole system is a single unit once again and landed. So if you're doing like daughter vehicles, then those need to be able to redock and things like that. So difficult to do, but if that's a path you want to take, then it is something that can be done. The rules are and the rules are written such that if you think you can use that to game a mission in a way, so for example, just using a small drone to carry the sensor target on the adaptation mission through the course and then just lumber along with your payload carrying device, that is taken care of, right? That loophole won't work. But there are some edge cases where a daughter vehicle might be advantageous, but it will be very difficult to execute.
With the competition aircraft weighing above 55 pounds, how are we to perform tests before the competition? And how will operations be done during the competition? Special airworthiness per aircraft, COA, any suggestions?
So it is expected, well, yeah, all these vehicles are going to be well above 55 pounds if they are going to qualify. So they actually have to, in order to show up at the competition, you need to have demonstrated that the vehicle has flown with the full payload, which is the payload by itself is more than 55 pounds. So these aircraft will all be heavy, so they're going to be registered with experimental airworthiness and all that. So there will be webinars specifically on, hey, what's the regulatory environment look like for a vehicle like this, right? Uncrewed, but large. So we're not going to get onto that here, but we recognize that is like a common question that a lot of teams are going to have. And so GoAERO is going to do its best to provide as many resources and information as possible to help teams navigate that.
Can we apply with more than one iteration in the digital stage 1 of the competition? Yes, you can. You can submit multiple submissions in stage 1 of the competition. Should you have any additional questions, please, again, use the forum in order to clarify. Can the aircraft extend beyond the edge of the sand pit?
Yes. So like I said, all of those OZs are defined where the boundaries are just where your ground contact is made. Okay, so you could have an airplane with a 100-foot span, as long as its ground contact patch is small and fits inside of it, then it's fine.
Has an RFP or site selection study been completed for the physical competition?
Nope, not yet. But like I said, the venue hasn't been selected. We recognize that having that information is a really important thing for teams. It's also really important for GoAERO, right? Because putting on the competition is no small feat. And just keep in mind that part of the game, so to speak, of playing this competition and being good at it and your strategic decisions is going to come from knowing what that venue is going to be and what time of year it's going to happen, because this is going to be a rain or shine event. That's part of the spirit of the competition, is these things operate not just anywhere, but anytime, right? They don't wait for, beautiful conditions in order to get the job done, because public good missions can't do that. And so part of the way the game is played is making those strategic decisions from early in the design of your aircraft, of saying, okay, when and where is this thing going to have to operate, and what are the expected weather conditions going to be, and being able to balance those risks and the unpredictability of that.
So there are several questions regarding the documents, the GoFly rulebook, the technical rules online, as well as this webinar. You can find absolutely everything as it relates to the competition on herox.com/GoAERO. That includes the guidelines in full, the rules that govern the competition, the criteria, the submission form, all documents that you can use and support from various partners we will have will be available for you on the website. And we will also make this webinar available, the recording in full, available for you so that you can reference it at any point. There's also a question regarding raising external funds. We absolutely encourage you to raise external funds. This competition will require additional funding for you to be able to put your team together, to do your build, and to actually even just come to the fly off itself. So we absolutely encourage you to raise funds. In the future, we will be providing you with additional support, as well as master lectures with investors to offer you some advice on how to go about doing this. Again, please use herox.com/GoAERO as your resource, as more information will be posted there to support you throughout this entire process. There are quite a few questions. We'll try and get through as many as we can over the next few moments that we have. Otherwise, we will do our best to address them post the webinar. Will there be power outlets to charge batteries?
So you should not necessarily count on it, and you shouldn't necessarily count on, even if there is power available, you shouldn't count on high power. So in terms of high voltage, high current availability.
What is the maximum distance flown total per flight on the longest distance challenge from launch to landing?
So the productivity mission layout, we're aiming for around on the order of 2 miles for total air distance of for the out and back. So that would be on a single segment, but you have to do that multiple times. So it's up to you whether you want to kind of refuel, recharge for all that. Most of the other missions, they fall into the footprint of like a football field.
Are there can a team use a scalable and reconfigurable developed aircraft?
Yes. And also just I'll add to that 3 years is in the grand scheme of developing a thing that is mostly new and can fly is not very much time at all. So a huge part of being successful in this competition is just being able to show up on that timeline with something that can fly. And so leveraging as all the resources you have, including any components or pieces of technology that already exist, is probably a good idea.
Can bonus scoring be added for completing the productivity mission multiple times without refueling, recharging?
So there are already. So I think I understand the question of basically saying, could we explicitly reward that? Right now, it's rewarded by being able to score better. And so I hear the question of wanting to be more specific about saying, oh, if you don't have to refuel or recharge, then there's kind of some more bonus points for that. Right now, we kind of it's already incentivized the way the scoring is set up. So there's no plan to add bonus points for that. But we also recognize that there is, that is really valuable, right? To be able to operate for 90 minutes and do lots and lots of cycles without refueling or recharging is a really impressive capability. It's just we recognize also that the incredible mismatch in what that would do to the sizing of the aircraft. If that were strongly incentivized, then it would just be driving way oversized vehicles for all the other missions. And so that kind of was a deliberate choice to not have the incentives for being able to do all that unrefueled or unrecharged. Didn't want those incentives to be super strong, just mildly strong, so that there's you get rewarded with a little bit better score.
Are turbine-powered aircraft allowed? And alongside that, are range extenders either ICE or turbine allowed?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no restrictions on our plan. These vehicles are not expected to be battery electric vehicles. The expectation is that the vehicles that do well, the aircraft that do well in the different missions, are going to have different powertrains, and that there will be a lot of variety in what shows up in the competition. That said, they could be all battery electric to show up. could be none of them that are likely to show up. We don't know, but the hope is, and the expectation is that there will be a variety because there are different incentives in different places, and different teams are going to make different strategic decisions about which prizes and which points to go after, and that will affect those types of engineering choices.
Can we share ground transportation?
So is that a question like, can two teams share the same flatbed trailer for their ground transportation requirement?
Let's assume.
Yeah, so the logistics of the competition would make that potentially difficult. So I don't think, in general, I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with like sharing some resources between teams, but the logistics of running the competition may preclude that. So that's kind of not really an answer, so kind of TBD once we know more about how the competition is going to be laid out. So especially if like the ground transportation vehicle is your primary means for getting from, say, where your aircraft is stored on site to the starting point for a particular mission, then that would be a resource that you really shouldn't be sharing with another team, for example.
Is there any requirement or restriction to the weight of Alex's clothing?
So we've just said that Alex's nominal weight is 125 pounds, and we're going to add some clothing. We're not going to add a ton. We're not going to add 5-pound boots and 2 pounds of jacket or anything like that. It's just going to be minimal, just to have Alex be clothed rather than the stock mannequin, which just comes with a pair of shorts.
Are the balloons rubber or mylar?
Rubber. Good question.
What licenses are required to participate in the competition? Any required regulations?
So I'll just say a bit on the same answer before about the regulations for the vehicle. So GoAERO is just going to provide as many resources and webinars as possible to help you navigate that. It is likely that the pilot in command of the system will be required to be a licensed pilot.
There's a clarification that's been requested. Does the vehicle need to pick up the loads, or do the handlers load it?
The handlers load it. If the vehicle is able to autonomously pick up the load, the thing is, like, those payloads, when the aircraft is airborne, nothing else is allowed to be touching the payload. So it won't be possible to like pre-bundle the payloads in like a nice little bag with a little like loop on it that the aircraft can come and autonomously grab, because nothing is allowed to be touching those payloads otherwise. So it is possible to get it is intentionally possible in the rules to get around this with some, if you had all the robot arm end effectors in the world, you could do it without payload handlers. But it's expected that most teams are going to be using human payload handlers to facilitate that. That said, for the productivity mission, you can have as many additional like dollies and aids and things like that, and tools that those payload handlers use to help them quickly and efficiently load and unload those payloads.
So we are over time, but we still have well over 100 folks still on the webinar. We'll stick around for just a few more minutes to answer as many more questions as we can. If we are unable to address your question, please again, go to the forum at herox.com/GoAERO, register for the competition, submit your forum question. As you can see, there's lively discussion happening already between innovators, and should anything require clarification, we will take the opportunity to answer you there. For 35% scale aircraft, will the limitations also be 35% scale, such as Alex and landing zones, excuse me?
So if you read the requirements, that 35% scale aircraft just needs to be able to take off, fly a distance, and come back. You don't need to like simulate any of the missions or any of the mission elements like takeoff and landing zone boundaries. And then the payload, we require like simulated payload weight, but for that stage 2 requirement, that can just be a more blob-like device. You don't need to source a payload that is exactly geometrically like Alex. And that's the same. The same is also true for the requirement to show that you've flown with payload before showing up for the competition at the fly-off. You just need to show that you've flown with the payload weight, and the vehicle is capable of that. You don't need to show that you've flown with exactly the Alex geometry for your payload.
So there continue to be some questions about the restriction on battery versus gas-powered aircraft. I believe we've answered that question a couple of times. I would suggest that if you continue to have questions, please reference the FAQ and or continue to use the forum should you need further clarification.
Yeah, these are not, there is no requirement to make electric aircraft. Like this, period. Like, want to make that extremely clear. This is not an electric airplane competition. This is not a, it is just things that need to be able to fly. The vast majority of the history of aviation has not used batteries. And that said, there are some developments that may enable some configurations, but there's just no requirement for, this is not an electric aircraft competition. So I don't want anybody to have that impression and feel that they're overly constrained by that.
Someone is asking for further clarification on the first pair of human payload handlers utilized counts as 50 pounds plus 50 pounds for each additional payload handler. I read this as all teams are penalized 50 pounds automatically given the first two payload handlers, since the first two payload handlers are required.
Yes, so like the one thing I didn't talk about is that total system weight that is the denominator of your score for that productivity mission is kind of the weight of the aircraft and all your spare batteries and all your tools and all that stuff that you use, plus the payload handlers. We're not going to weigh the payload handlers, we're just going to count them and say like, okay, each payload handler counts for this. And the reason you can think of it as the first payload handler is free, or the second payload handler is free, whichever one you think. And the reason for that was very simple. It's just that we didn't feel that asking a single person to lift a 125-pound mannequin was a reasonable thing to ask. And so the solution to that, to not incentivizing people breaking their backs, was just to say like, hey, the first one's free, so that you can, if you need any payload handlers at all, then they'll be able to share the load of being able to lift 125 pounds. And it's not only like incentives to breaking back. You also don't want to give huge advantages to teams that are able to recruit, champions from strongman competitions and things like that.
There's a question about the restrictions on working on a build right now. There are specific requirements in order for you to begin building for the GoAERO competition. And all of those requirements are listed under the competition parameters. There are a series of agreements that you are required to complete, as well as information that you're required to submit to us and be approved in order to be officially a stage 2 or stage 3 competitor. And then and only then are you able to begin your build within the confines of the GoAERO competition. So we would encourage you to read the competition parameters carefully so that you understand those requirements. And again, please reach out to us should you have any questions. There's a question about a buoyant device. If they can be used in the competition, is the use of lifting gas limited to helium only, or since the flyer is intended for cargo transportation, is it permissible to use hydrogen to fill the balloon?
Yeah, I would like to go back to the previous question about being allowed to build for the competition. If you just read the details and understand that GoAERO is not trying to, if you've been working on something already that you're like, oh, this technology or this aircraft like could be adapted to GoAERO, and you've been working on that for the last several years in your garage, that those rules are not meant to restrict you or keep you from using those developments. So I just wanted to clarify that it's not saying like, oh, you have to start from scratch on everything, and everything that has ever been built or created or conceived before today can't be used. So just want to clarify that restriction is not in place. But yeah, that's a read the fine print sort of thing. On lifting gases, there's no restriction. Buoyant lift is fine. It's not explicitly forbidden.
Okay, one last question. How can we partner with participants in providing a safe airport environment in a rural setting to test vehicles for the competition?
How can we, like, how can GoAERO or
I
um,
believe they're
can you
referring to
clarify?
themselves. I believe they're referring to themselves as a team. So how
Oh,
can we as a team?
okay. Like secure places to go test and fly.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think this is the place to get into it. Again, that's just going to be in the scope of when GoAERO does kind of webinars on like the regulatory environment and providing the resources for teams to be able to navigate the regulatory environment to be able to do that.
And we'll be able to share or sort of offer a little bit more insight on that as the competition continues. And we have really great uh, folks from the FAA who are partnering with us in order to be able to support the teams throughout this entire process to be able to do what they need to do in order to actually get to the fly off. So we will certainly provide more information in the coming months. Okay,
Cool.
thank you so
About time
much.
to wrap things up. Yeah.
Yes, yes. I was just
All
going
right.
to say,
Great.
thank you again so much, everyone, for joining us. We really appreciate it. As again, we've said over and over again, as you can see on the screen, please go to the website. Please register for the competition. Have your team members registered. Use the forum. Communicate with each other. Communicate with us. And we look forward to your participation. Thank you so much.